She was waiting for me in the hallway, so small and so heartbreakingly quiet, her backpack already strapped on like she was preparing for a journey no child should have to imagine. The ears of her stuffed rabbit poked out of the zipper, one bent, one straight, like even the toy was holding its breath. I opened my arms wide, expecting her to run to me, but she didn't move. She didn't even lift her gaze from the floor. Just stood there, 6 years old and already carrying the weight of rejection on her tiny shoulders. "Sweetheart," I whispered, but the word barely carried. She didn't answer, didn't smile, didn't even flinch. Behind her, my mother appeared with the same too bright smile she'd been rehearsing for decades, a performance polished enough to fool strangers but not me. She said my daughter had been an angel, but I knew better. An angel doesn't look like she just survived a war. Then came my sister, perched smugly beside her own little girl, who was the same age as mine but treated like royalty. Chloe grinned at me with the unbothered arrogance of a child who had never been told no, while Rachel's eyes flickered with something sharp, something victorious. That faint smirk of hers was enough to make my stomach twist. Michael reached for our daughter's backpack and asked softly if she was ready to go home. She gave a stiff nod. No hug, no chatter. Just silence, thick and suffocating. We left quickly, because I couldn't stand one more second in the stench of fake cheerfulness and hidden cruelty. The car ride home was worse. She sat in the back seat, rabbit clutched against her chest, staring out the window as if the world outside might hold answers. Normally, she filled every moment with stories about games and snacks and silly little songs. But this time, silence again. When I asked if she had fun, she shrugged. When I pressed if everything was okay, she whispered something so fragile it broke me. "Am I taking too much space?" The words tumbled out soft and shaking, like she was afraid they would shatter if spoken too loud. My husband's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles went white. My heart thudded so hard it hurt. I twisted in my seat, begging her to explain, but she just twisted the rabbit's ear tighter, her eyes locked on the glass. Back home, it didn't improve. She hovered in the hallway, still strapped into her little backpack, as if she wasn't convinced she was allowed to put it down. When I gently told her to put her toy away before dinner, she snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. She dropped the rabbit into the toy bin, shoved it down like she was hiding evidence, and burst into tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it was out. I'll be good. I'll make space. Please don't send me away." My entire body froze. Michael dropped to his knees, reaching for her instantly, but she thrashed against his arms, sobbing so hard her little words broke into gasps. Auntie said I need to make space for the real children. She said I'd go back to the orphanage." The air cracked around us, the words cut through me, jagged and merciless. I pulled her against me, felt the way her tiny body trembled so violently it shook my bones. I told her she was mine, always mine, and no one was sending her anywhere. She stared at me with those big wet eyes, desperate, searching for truth. But Auntie said, Auntie was wrong. My voice was steady, cold as steel. She clung to me, sobs, slowly quieting, but the damage was carved into her. I kissed her hair, rocked her until she calmed, but in my chest, the fire was building. Rachel had smirked at me in that hallway like she had already won. She thought she could break my daughter in 3 days. She thought wrong. Later that night, when the house was silent, and our daughter finally slept curled around her rabbit, I stood in the kitchen, staring out into the darkness. Michael lingered in the doorway, waiting, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to. All I could hear was her little voice trembling, promising she would make space. And all I could feel was the storm rising inside me. They had no idea what they had unleashed. As I stood in that kitchen with the weight of my daughter's words still echoing in my head, the pieces of my childhood started stitching themselves together in ways I had never wanted to admit. The favoritism, the little cruelties, the moments where I was reminded over and over again that my place in the family was conditional. My sister Rachel had been the golden child since the day she was born. She could throw a tantrum in the middle of the grocery store and be called spirited. I could bring home perfect grades and be met with silence or worse, questions about why they weren't even better. That imbalance was woven into every corner of my childhood. I remember birthday cakes where she got the biggest slice, the one with the extra frosting, while mine was trimmed down, handed over with a thin smile, as if I should be grateful for whatever crumbs remained. I remember family photos where she stood in the center, glowing, while I was nudged to the side, cropped like background scenery. And I remember telling myself it was normal, because children don't have the language to call it favoritism. They just swallow it down and carry it with them. I thought I'd buried all of that when I built my own life. When I married Michael, who was gentle and conflict-averse and endlessly patient. When we tried for children and failed month after month, sitting through sterile appointments that chipped away at our hope until we were left raw and aching. When the verdict came, my chances of conceiving were near impossible. We turned to adoption. It wasn't desperation. It was a choice made after years of heartbreak, a decision to open our arms to a child who needed them. And then came Leah. She was only 2 when we first met her, wide-eyed and wary, cautious about every touch. But the moment I saw her, I knew. She was mine. It didn't matter what blood said or what biology had decided. That little girl belonged in my arms. Over the years, she bloomed into this stubborn, bright, endlessly curious tornado who filled every room with honesty and light. She knew she was adopted because we never hid it from her. But at 2, memories of the orphanage faded like fog. She didn't carry those shadows until now. My family's response to her had always been thinly veiled politeness. They cooed and patted her head, smiling with a stiffness that made my skin crawl. They told me how wonderful it was, how she would be treated like one of their own. But their hugs lacked warmth, their eyes lacked the sparkle that came so easily when they looked at Rachel's daughter. Little comments crept in, always cloaked as observations. It must be different than having your own. She'll always know she isn't truly yours. Subtle little knives wrapped in sweetness. I told myself Leah didn't notice, that she had me and Michael, and that would be enough. But then the impossible happened. Against every medical prediction, I found out I was pregnant. It was 1 in 1,000, a miracle they called it. And my joy was not because Leah wasn't enough, it was because she was. I wanted her to have a sibling, someone to grow alongside, someone to share her life with. I thought my family would celebrate. Instead, their smiles grew colder. "Now you'll have a real child," my mother said, with syrup dripping from her tone. "Do you regret adopting now?" Rachel asked, with that infuriating smirk. My father muttered something about how the baby would need space, how it might be confusing to grow up with a stranger in the house. A stranger. That's the word he used for my daughter. I tucked away their words, stored them like splinters pressing deeper into skin. But Leah noticed. She saw the way her cousin's drawings were framed proudly on the fridge, while hers were left on the table until they disappeared into the trash. She heard the way Chloe was called a princess while she was simply described as polite, and she felt the way love was rationed, as though it was currency she hadn't earned. Then came the hospital scare. Those 3 endless days where I was hooked to monitors, convinced every second could be the one where I lost the baby. Michael stayed by my side while Leah stayed with my parents, and I told myself it was fine, that they would care for her. But I was wrong. Because while I was fighting for the baby I hadn't even met yet, they were busy telling my daughter she needed to make space. They told her the baby I carried mattered more, that she was only temporary, that her home with us could vanish as quickly as it began. And now I understood why she didn't drop her backpack when I brought her home, why she whispered about being small and making space, why she sobbed into my chest, terrified of being sent back to a place she barely remembered. They had broken her in ways that reopened wounds she didn't even know she had. My family had done that. My own blood. And in that moment, fear was gone. What replaced it was rage so sharp it felt like a blade pressed to my throat. They thought they could plant doubt in her heart. They thought wrong. It was a Saturday morning when the decision hardened into something I could no longer postpone. Leah was at her dance class, spinning her way through little routines with the other children, her laughter echoing through a place untouched by my family's poison. She was safe there, oblivious, and that was exactly how I wanted it. What I had planned was not for small ears. Michael drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly the tendons stood out pale against his skin. The car hummed with silence until he finally asked, "Are you sure about this?" His voice carried the weight of someone who would follow me no matter what, but who feared the storm waiting at the end of the road. I turned and looked at him, tired, swollen with pregnancy, my body aching and my patience long since burned to ash. I gave him a look that said more than words ever could. "I am very pregnant, very tired, and very much done." He shut his mouth and nodded. Smart man. By the time we pulled into my parents' driveway, I wasn't nervous. There was no flutter in my stomach, no second guessing. What churned in me now was a steady buzz of rage, hot and electric, a current that anchored me. I stepped out of the car, squared my shoulders, and walked straight into the house. They were all there, like some twisted stage play set for my arrival. My mother fussed with a plate of cookies, smiling too brightly, desperate to appear like the world's best grandmother. My father stood off to the side, arms folded, the eternal shadow, always present, never warm. Rachel sat on the couch like she was holding court, her husband beside her, nodding dutifully at every word. And Chloe sprawled across the carpet with crayons, showered in applause for every squiggle she made. It looked like family. But it reeked of rot. I didn't waste time with greetings. I didn't play their game. My voice cut through the room, sharp as shattered glass. What exactly did you say to my daughter? The air shifted instantly. Even Chloe's crayon paused mid-stroke. My mother looked up first, smile plastered on like icing over a spoiled cake. Oh, Julia, don't be dramatic. Leah misunderstood. Misunderstood? The laugh that came from me was dry and humorless. She came home sobbing because her auntie told her she needed to make space for the real children. Does that sound like a misunderstanding to you? Rachel straightened, her lips twitching into that smirk I'd known since childhood. She was in Chloe's space, she said. She needs to learn boundaries. Boundaries? I snapped. She's 6 years old, Rachel. The only boundary she should be learning is not to eat glue. Michael shifted beside me, ready to step in, but I raised my hand to stop him. This was mine. My father finally spoke, his voice low, heavy with condescension. You're too sensitive right now. Everything feels bigger because of the pregnancy. Of course. The classic tactic. Gaslight me into questioning my own outrage. I tilted my head and let the fury steady me. Sensitive? Funny. I thought sensitivity was when you don't tell a child she's disposable. Rachel rolled her eyes. No one said she was disposable. Really? Because she told me. Auntie said she would go back to the orphanage. That doesn't sound like a motivational speech. Rachel shifted, the first flicker of discomfort cracking her polished mask. Her husband squeezed her knee as though his touch could shield her from the truth spilling into the room. We didn't mean it literally, my mother cut in quickly, her voice dripping with sugar. It was just to make her behave. Behave! That was their word, always their excuse. I leaned forward, eyes burning into hers. You told a child who doesn't even remember the orphanage, but knows enough to fear it, that if she didn't behave, she would be sent back, and you thought that was okay? Silence. The only sound was the crinkle of Chloe's crayon pressing too hard on paper. Then Rachel's mask slipped just enough for me to see the truth underneath. Stop pretending Chloe and that girl are equals. They're not. And there it was, the quiet part out loud. My father didn't blink, my mother didn't flinch. Rachel's husband nodded along as though she'd just recited scripture. Clarity hit me then, cold and solid. They were never going to change. They were never going to see Leah as theirs, as family, as blood. They weren't going to apologize, not truly. And in that moment, the decision crystallized. Michael cleared his throat softly, and for once, we were perfectly aligned. They'll never change, he said. No, I agreed. They won't. Which is why they'll never see my children again. Gasps followed, my mother clutching her pearls with faux shock, Rachel scoffing, my father shaking his head with rehearsed disappointment, but I didn't care. The line had been drawn. The car ride home after that confrontation felt different than the one we had taken to get there. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It wasn't laced with doubt or fear. It was clean, sharp, final. Michael's hand rested on the wheel, steady now instead of trembling, and when he asked quietly, "So, what now?" I didn't hesitate. Now, we cut them out. His jaw tightened, but he nodded, the kind of nod that meant he had been waiting for me to say those words. All of them, I added. He repeated it back, not as a question, but as agreement. All of them. That night, after Leah was tucked in with her rabbit clutched against her chest, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone glowing in my hand. The family group chat stared back at me, a thread stretching back years, filled with pictures of Chloe, reminders about dinners, passive-aggressive guilt trips. I hovered over the screen for only a moment before swiping out of it completely. Gone. In its place, I started a new chat. Just friends. A couple of cousins I actually trusted, Michael, the people who mattered. And then I opened a fresh document and began planning my baby shower. This time, there would be no begging for space, no settling for crumbs. This time, I was taking space back. The phone calls started as soon as the invitations went out. My mother's voice came first, shrill and dripping with outrage. "How dare you exclude us? We are your parents." Rachel's call was nastier, her words like venom. "You're pathetic, Julia. Hiding behind that girl, poisoning her against us. You'll regret this." My father tried too, calmer, colder. "This isn't how family works. You don't just cut people off." But the truth was, they had been cutting me off since the day I was born. Slice by slice, comment by comment, favor by favor denied. And now they were shocked when I finally returned the favor. When I stopped answering, the texts poured in. Paragraphs of guilt trips, veiled threats, desperate attempts to rewrite history. I muted the thread. Let them scream into the void. But they didn't stop there. They called around, weaving their story to anyone who would listen. They told cousins, neighbors, distant relatives. My mother painted me as unstable, blaming hormones, blaming the pregnancy, blaming anyone but herself. She said I had turned Leah against them, that I was cruel, that I was selfish. One cousin actually called me, her voice wavering with confusion. "Your mom said you banned them from the baby shower, is that true?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "She said it's because you're unstable, that it's the pregnancy." I snorted. She told my 6-year-old daughter she wasn't real family and threatened to send her back to the orphanage. "That's why she's not invited." There was silence on the other end. Then a stunned little "oh," and with every "oh" that spread through the wider family tree, another crack split the illusion my parents had been clinging to. Word travels fast, and once it's out, it can't be taken back. By the time Saturday arrived, my house was glowing. Streamers stretched across the living room, a cake from my friend Sarah waiting on the counter, stacks of pink and blue plates ready for hands to grab. Friends filled the rooms, laughter bounced off the walls, and Leah darted between guests, her rabbit tucked under one arm, handing out napkins like treasures. She proudly announced to anyone who would listen that she was going to be a big sister. When people called her the best helper, the best big sis, her smile grew so wide it nearly split her face. For once, she wasn't in the shadows. For once, she was at the center of the joy. I wanted to freeze it, to hold it, to keep her safe in that glow forever. And then the doorbell rang. Michael and I exchanged a look. His jaw set, mine tightened. He shook his head slightly, already knowing. I opened the door anyway, and there they were. My mother stood in front, holding a bakery cake with sagging frosting, her smile stretched so wide it was all teeth. My father loomed behind her, stiff as stone. Rachel swept forward like she owned the place, her husband trailing with a gift bag big enough to hold a small child. The room behind me quieted. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned. My mother beamed. Surprise. We couldn't stay away. Family is family, after all. Behind me, I felt my guests shifting, unease rippling through the crowd. Some hadn't realized they weren't invited. Now the question hung heavy in the air. Why not? I stepped aside. Because what was I supposed to do? Slam the door in their faces with half the neighborhood watching? Not yet. They entered like performers arriving late to their own show, pretending the applause was still waiting for them. My mother shoved the sagging cake into Sarah's startled hands and immediately announced, "Oh, what a lovely gathering. This baby will bring the family together properly." Properly. The word fell heavy, like a slap dressed as kindness. I stood near the fireplace, watching, waiting. Rachel clutched her oversized gift bag like it was evidence of devotion, her husband nodding at her every word as if programmed to agree. My father hovered in the background, the permanent shadow to my mother's staged sunshine. They worked the room with the precision of people who believed charm could erase cruelty. But the poison slipped through quickly. My mother's voice carried across the kitchen as she told a cluster of guests, "Of course this one is different. Your own baby, it's just special." A cousin's eyebrows shot up, but she stayed silent. Rachel laughed at the punch bowl, tossing her hair. "Chloe has been so excited. She says she'll teach the baby everything. It's different, you know. when it's blood. That word, blood, clung to the air like smoke. Guests shifted uneasily. Whispers stirred. Still, I stayed silent, letting their own words unravel them. It didn't take long. The breaking point arrived like a spark to dry grass. One of my friends crouched down beside Leah, smiling warmly, asking if she was excited to be a big sister. Leah's face lit up, proud and shy, clutching her rabbit like a badge of honor. She nodded, her little chest puffing out. And then Rachel, leaning toward her husband but not nearly quiet enough, muttered, "Please, she's not even a real sister." The room froze. Leah's smile fell apart, crumbling as quickly as it had bloomed. My chest went cold, ice where fire had been. Rachel straightened immediately, eyes darting, her mouth fumbling for a save. But it was too late. The words had been heard. My mother jumped in, her voice sticky sweet. "That's not what she meant." But the silence in the room was louder than her defense. My cousin's voice cut through, sharp with disbelief. "Did you just say that?" Another guest shook her head, disgust twisting her face. "How could you say that about a child in front of her?" Leah pressed herself into my side, trembling, her rabbit crushed between us. Michael's voice came steady, firm, final. "It's time for you to leave." Rachel's face burned red. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting." "No," I interrupted, my voice low but carrying. "You just showed everyone here exactly who you are, and I believe you." My father tried one last time, his tone dripping with authority. "We didn't mean it like that. You're overreacting." I laughed, short and bitter. "Overreacting? My daughter came home sobbing because you told her she needed to make space for the real children. And here you are, proving her right." The mask cracked then. My mother's voice rose sharp, desperate. "We are your parents. You can't just cut us out. Watch me." The silence that followed was absolute. The guests stared at them, lips tight, eyes filled with judgment. My parents sputtered excuses, tried to plaster over the wound with charm, but the performance was over. They had lost their audience. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just pointed to the door. "Get out." Rachel's mouth opened, but Michael stepped forward, his face carved from stone. She said, "Leave." And for once, they listened. The door slammed behind them, leaving behind the sagging cake on my counter like a bad joke. The room exhaled all at once, but I didn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It has been nearly a year since that baby shower, and the silence that followed has been louder than all their shouting combined. Not once have my parents or Rachel or her husband crossed the threshold of our home. Not once have they held the baby, or sat at our table, or shared in even the smallest piece of our lives. Of course, it wasn't for lack of trying. The first attempt came within days of the birth. My phone lit up with messages, one after another, a tidal wave of words. "We want to meet the baby. Let's put this behind us." Put this behind us? As though telling a 6-year-old child she wasn't real family was the sort of thing you sweep under a rug. As though threatening to send her back to the orphanage could be forgotten with a smile and a plate of cookies. I ignored every single one. Then came my father, showing up on the porch with a stuffed bear clutched in his hands. He stood there awkwardly, shifting from one foot to the other, as though the weight of plush and polyester could erase years of cruelty. Michael answered the door. He didn't even let my father speak before closing it gently but firmly in his face. That was the last time they tried in person. After that came silence, not because they gave up, but because everyone else began to talk. Stories have a way of spilling beyond the walls where they begin. The details of what Rachel said at the shower, of what my parents allowed, of how they stood in silence while my daughter cried, all of it spread. Friends who once offered them the benefit of the doubt stopped making excuses. Cousins who used to defend them turned their backs. Neighbors looked the other way in grocery store aisles. They thought they could smear me as unstable, thought they could twist the narrative, but in their arrogance, they destroyed their own reputations. Now, when their names come up at gatherings, or in passing conversation, people don't say, "What a lovely family." They say, "Those are the ones who threatened to send their granddaughter back to the orphanage." That has become their legacy. Meanwhile, my home has never felt lighter. Leah no longer whispers about making space. She no longer hovers with her backpack strapped on, waiting for permission to exist. She no longer apologizes for being here. She is too busy being a proud big sister. She announces it to strangers in the park, to cashiers at the grocery store, to anyone who will listen. She helps with bottles, giggles during diaper changes, presses kisses to the baby's forehead with the care of someone who understands love more deeply than most adults ever will. My friends are still here. The cousins who matter are still here. The circle is smaller, yes, but it is brighter. It is stronger. And the ones who aren't here? They erased themselves with their own words. They wanted space. They got it. Now, when I stand in my kitchen and look at the fridge, I don't see Chloe's drawings framed while Leah's are lost in the trash. I see Leah's art, taped proudly, scribbles and rainbows and stick figures that mean everything. I see photos of her holding her baby brother, grinning so wide it lights up the entire room. That is my family. This is my family, complete, unshakable, and mine. And no one, not Rachel, not my mother, not my father will ever take that away. Do you think I did the right thing? Did I go too far, or not nearly far enough? I know what I believe, but now I want to know what you think.